Hi y'all. Possum has come to join us. Okay, so one of the things that I think about a lot is consumerism and fast fashion, and especially when it comes to seasonal or special occasion wear. Because like it's one thing to buy a t-shirt that you wear until it shreds, but it's another thing to buy a garment you only wear once. And I have a few events coming up that I need to wear a specialty garment, and I feel such a temptation to buy a new garment instead of just wearing what I have again. Instead of just going and buying a new fast fashion garment, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make my own, and it's going to be some very slow fashion. So as per usual, what we're going to talk about next is the history of the art form that we're looking at. Over 500,000 years ago, people didn't sew. You would just take whatever materials you had and just wrap it. This is very environmentally friendly. About 19,000 years ago is when we start to get history of needles made out of bones and ivory. And this is the beginning of like sewing as we know it today. So after this, we started to make really simple garments out of just squares of natural materials, like things like wool or linen. This is like the things like the togas, tunic, because it's really easy, as we saw, to weave a square and then use that square to make something. At this point, there wasn't really a lot of dyeing of fabrics, and there wasn't really like a textile industry. People would just make what they needed or sell one or two pieces. As we keep going on, so we're out of ancient Greece and we're into like medieval Europe, and we start to dye clothes, we start to make different shapes. This is also when we start to get patterned fabric, and so we'll weave into patterns. We start to use new materials like cotton and silk. As we keep going, we get things like lacings to make corsets, we get buttons, we get brocade, and now we're starting to look at, instead of just straight lines and those straight squares, we start to get curved and shaped, having a textile industry. We are selling fabric now, and there is a little bit more of an industry, but it's not booming. It's, you know, we'll sell some fabric, we sell a garment or two, but it's all custom made for the person who's going to wear it, and they're going to keep that garment until it's just gone. The big change that changed the textile industry is one that changed a lot of industries, and that's the Industrial Revolution. And some of the really big changes that took the textile industry from people making fabric and garments for themselves or for very small selling is the invention of the sewing machine, the capacity to trade things much faster with like the steam engine and stuff, and synthetic fabric. All of this made everything cheaper and faster. And this is also when we start to get a bunch of marketing. So this marketing changes the way that people interact with their garments. It used to be you'd have a few custom fit garments and that was it. But now people would start to buy things ready-made, and you would start to buy more, and it would be cheaper and cheaper per garment. We can also see this is starting to be the rise of like specific fashion for like children and young women, and then like married women. And things kind of kept going like that for most of the Industrial Revolution through World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II slowed down a lot of the textile industry because materials like synthetic fabrics and silk were needed for the war effort. So a lot of the marketing and all of that was made a lot more towards mend and make do rather than buy a new garment. This changes significantly after World War II ends though. And we get full-blown marketing, we get full-blown industrial giants that are making this textile industry run faster and faster and faster and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And this is not even like me being like, oh, it all sucks and we need to go back to just making fabric at home. There's some things in the 50s that I love, but we can also start to see, and at this point people are still making their own clothes, but you also have a very big rise of ready-made garments. And it's also not uncommon to have a bunch of garments, not just one or two garments that fit you very well. And then through the 60s and 70s and 80s, we have a bunch of very interesting trends, and also that continued globalization and cheapening of the textile industry. So first in the 60s, we have this kind of shift in Western culture from like adult-oriented fashion to children-oriented fashion. I guess it's more accurate to say youth-oriented, so like teenagers. And this had a few effects, mostly being that trends became much shorter and much more volatile. So instead of trends lasting for a few years, we start to get a shorter and shorter trend cycle, which we can still see shortening today. The 80s, we really see the global trade and textile industry change, and we also really start to see a shutdown of people making their own garments and of easily editable trends. So for instance, before the 80s, it was pretty easy to like drop a waistline, you know, shorten a hem from like a 50s gown to a 60s. And we also have a huge rise of cheap synthetic clothes. We also start to see in the early 90s this rise of like consumerism as a trend. And now like opulence has always been trendy, but it starts to really become a flex of like how much stuff do you own. In the early 2000s, it's kind of the same thing, and we can really start to notice this a little bit of a rise of like ethical consumerism. So people are starting to realize how bad the textile industry is. So what is so bad about the textile industry anyway? The big deal with the textile industry being so fast and so cheap is it has a lot of negative impacts on how everything works. So first and foremost, the globalization of the textile industry leads to a lot of CO2 emissions. The other issue with this, the way the industry is set up right now, is there's a lot of water waste, a source in the doobly-doo with actual numbers. There's also like pesticides and all of that, plus whatever chemicals they use to treat the natural fiber after they grow it. There's also a lot of fabric waste. So once the garment's worn, I think it's something like the average garment is only worn like 6 times before it's thrown away. First and foremost, please don't throw away a garment. Please donate it or sell it or recycle the fabric. And it's an even smaller cycle with specialty garments. So they might only get worn once before it gets thrown away. And that's awful for the environment. Like a single-use spoon, whatever. A single-use prom dress, that's insane. Buy a secondhand one, sell your dress once you're done. And that's not even really talking about the human cost of all of this, which is that these people who work in the textile industry, from growing it to making the fabric to making the actual garments, have long been in terrible working conditions. We can see all the way from like the Triangle Waist Shirt Factory fire to like the fact that people nowadays get paid like pennies on the dollar for work that they should be being paid a reasonable amount, to, you know, recently with the COVID epidemic, of people being working in these close quarters without adequate protection. So by and large, fast fashion in the textile industry in general is really hard on the environment and on humans. And that's kind of our rough history of sewing in the textile industry and why we kind of care what the textile industry has become. The only other note I'd like to make about marketing in the fashion industry, y'all understand that pleather is plastic, right? It's not vegan leather, it's plastic. And like the PR person who came up with this, brilliant. When you buy a plastic garment, it never degrades. So even if you take really good care of a plastic garment, whenever it inevitably gets thrown away because you can't recycle it, and you can't really repair it because it's plastic, it's never going to degrade. It is just going to break up and it's going to end up in the ocean. So don't buy it. And this is not like against every plastic garment ever, because sometimes like a nice pair of waterproof shoes, you're probably going to end up buying plastic shoes. But in general, if you can, buy secondhand organic materials. So if you buy a leather jacket secondhand, that is a much more environmentally friendly choice than buying plastic. And I know sometimes it can feel hard to buy leather, or my big thing's fur. I could never buy a fur garment. But if you buy a secondhand garment like that, it'll last forever and the damage is already done because the garment already exists. Versus buying, you know, let's say you buy a nice leather jacket and you have it for 20 years. You would have bought like 4 or 5 plastic jackets in that time instead of buying one secondhand coat. So try to avoid buying the pleather and the vegan leather as much as possible because it's just plastic and it's not good for the environment. And it's gonna end up being cheap and you're not gonna be able to, you know, repair it. So that's a history of sewing. That is why we're doing this project. What we're gonna be doing is we're going to be making our own special occasion dress. I will be talking about how to read a pattern, what kind of things you should have in a sewing kit, and then we will actually make a garment and then we'll display it at the end. So I will go and get into the studio and we will talk about what we need. Hello. So we are back on the floor again to talk about some materials for our project, plus also like what you kind of need in a basic sewing kit, which I highly recommend building out. You never know when you want to like reattach a button, hem some jeans that don't quite fit. Learning how to do basic sewing skills can really save you a lot of money in the long run. So first, let's talk about the basic sewing kit, and then we'll talk about some specific to what I use. So the first thing that you need for a basic sewing kit is going to be needles. There are lots and lots of different types, and they have different tips and eyes. So here, mostly all of these are fabric. So like there's no jersey knit or anything weird. They're all very sharp. If you're working with specialty fabric, just Google what needle you're supposed to use, and it'll let you know. And we can also see that there's a bunch of different eyes. So these are like huge for like thick fabric, and then got teeny tiny baby ones over here. Length doesn't really matter. You can also get specialty ones. So I have like curved upholstery needles, oops. And I have some biggins, and he's also curved. And then you can see, because that needle was so big, it made a huge hole. So that's it for needles. I do recommend getting a pin cushion or making one. I bought him because I think he's very cute. I do recommend getting some kind of binding agent. You can either get pins. The yellow pins I bought, but the white ones I found when I moved to a different house, I think. These are like corsage pins. You could also get pins. I don't know if I have any. I know I have some. I don't know if I have any that aren't like on the floor. Oh, here we go. You can also get these little quilter's pins that don't have a tip, like as much of one, and these are nice like if you want to iron or anything, you won't melt the plastic. So you need needles, you need pins, and you don't necessarily need to use pins if you don't want to. And this is just a little plastic Tupperware I use to store all my pins. You can also get clips. These are often called like quilter's clips, and they're little plastic clips that come in a bunch of different shapes and sizes. I have only recently got these and I love them. They are a little bit harder to sew with, but they are so easy to pin your fabric together, to pin your pattern to your fabric. Love it. The next basic thing that you need is thread. If you're new to sewing, I recommend getting a little pre-done pack. This is really high string. There are lots and lots of different kinds of thread, and what kind of thread that you need depends on what kind of fabric you're sewing. Most of the yarn that I get, I have this really nice pack that I bought new, but almost everything else I've gotten secondhand. So I do recommend just like looking at your thrift stores, asking your friends, especially for neutral. The only other thing you need for your basic sewing kit is fabric and scissors. We're going to talk a little bit in depth about our fabric in a second, so let's look at scissors. I've been sewing for a while, so I have opinions. Fabric scissors are to never be used on anything besides fabric and aluminum to sharpen it. Paper has a very jagged edge and will dull your scissors over time, which will lead to rough edges when you sew. And trying to get a pair of dull scissors through fine fabric, super frustrating. So sharp fabric shears. These are crinkle cut edge ones. They're a little bit springy, which is nice. It reduces the tension that you have to put on it. Help prevent fraying because there's not one edge for just the string to just come off. So I use these for cutting out rough drafts of patterns. These are super just plain fabric scissors. And then I also recommend some embroidery scissors. You can also use these tiny ones like this as a seam ripper. Seam ripper is safer than using thread scissors because these are sharp on the end, and so you could accidentally cut through your garment instead of just cutting the seam. All right, so basic sewing kit. Needle, thread, something to pin the fabric together, scissors. Let's talk advanced sewing kit now. So once you get your basics down, the next things that you're probably gonna wanna get are gonna be things like thimbles. This one's a metal one. I also have cheap plastic ones. If you're hand sewing, you probably really wanna get these. Also, as you get more into it, you're probably gonna wanna upgrade your markings. So typically you can just use like any kind of sidewalk chalk or a washable pen. I use Taylor's chalk, and they're these little fancy like Doritos. I bought these off of Amazon and then decided to store them in a jar. These are specifically designed to be high visibility but easily washed off. You also will probably want to get things like a French curve, a tube turner, all that. Or anything soft. These are really nice. I got this at a thrift store. These often also come in sewing kits if you buy pre-done ones. So when you start a project, what you are probably going to do is you are going to pick a pattern. A pattern is your directions for building your garment. These now, like you can download these digitally and print them out, tape them together, cut them back out if you want, and that'll be cheap to free, minus like the cost of the printer paper. They also can be really, really cheap if you go to big fabric stores like Joann's. They'll sometimes have sales and these will end up being like $2 or $3. Typically, I think they run about $15, so not like crazy expensive, but if you buy a few, they can get pricey. So when you go to pick a pattern, there's a few things to look for. Some of them will tell you how easy they are to sew. Like they'll say easy sew, beginner project, advanced. So pick something that's on your level. The other thing to look at that I see that I messed up here is you want to look at the size. So this is for a 10 to a 22. I actually wear a size 8, but that's okay. It's a lot easier to sew something a little bigger and take it in than to sew something too small. Because once you've sewn it too small, it is pretty unforgiving to go the other way. It's fixable. It's fixable, but it's a lot harder. So what we're doing, yeah, we're gonna do B. So what we wanna look at next is you gotta figure out your size by taking your measurements. I highly recommend having someone help you because it is a lot easier for them to look and see the tape. And then write these down somewhere. So we figured out what size we have, we've picked out a pattern. There's a lot of information back here. Let's decipher it and take a look and see what it means. I'm gonna put a clearer screenshot of this so you can see it. So we've already looked at the sizes thing. So what we're gonna look at next is we're gonna figure out how much fabric we need. I need to go grab my interfacing. Is it the number under what fabric it's telling us to get tells us how wide it should be. So it's saying we should use 45-inch wide bolts of fabric. This will be something that is on the cardboard label of the fabric. Let me grab one. I bought this bolt of fabric when one of the stores around my house closed a while ago. So it gives us a lot of information here. So we can see that this is 45 inches long. So this would be the correct size. They also come in 60 inches. The second number tells us how many yards of fabric we need. If you are in not America, you'll follow the numbers on the other side. So what this is telling us is we need a half a yard of 45-inch long fabric. So we need a yard by 45 inches square of lining. For my lining for this project, I will be using this old cotton. I think it was a bed sheet. So I will be using that because I have a lot of it. So it says that we're gonna need 1.5 yards of our regular fabric. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 yards. I looked at the wrong one. I hope I bought enough. I think I bought 2 yards anyways, which means that it's gonna be close. I almost always recommend getting more fabric than what you need, especially if it's specialty fabric, because trying to match something perfectly will be really hard. Especially if you're using natural materials, buy more than what you need. Because if it is something like a dyed cotton, the lots might be different and you might end up, even if you buy the same exact thing, it'll look different because they're natural. With like this polyester fabric, it's a little bit more. Okay, so this next little piece we have here, it says interfacing. So what interfacing is it's this special stiff fabric. I highly recommend using fusible fabric, and what this means is it's heat sensitive. And so you literally put it on the garment and then iron it, and it makes your fabric stiffer. And then down here, we see that it has suggested fabrics we should use. This is suggested. If you want to do something wild, go wild, but these are the fabrics that'll work the best. Okay, and then the last piece of the fabric is requirements. You will also see this sometimes called notions, and notions are literally everything but the fabric. So that's how we read our patterns. That's how we figure out what we actually need. That's a little bit of what we have got here. Oh, this is the zipper I have. It's a 20-inch invisible zipper. An invisible zipper, what it means is that when you sew it down, the only thing that you will be able to see will be the tiniest little gap right here. These are a little bit harder to install than a visible zipper, and installing zippers in general is pretty challenging. So if you have not done one before, I recommend practicing before you do it on your garment, because this will be really what makes or breaks it from like a beautiful dress to like, oh, you sewed that yourself, didn't you, honey? It's great. So one of the other things that will make your sewing projects look a lot better is if you iron everything. So you need an iron, you need an ironing board. Another tool that is not required but recommended is, and all it is a little magnetic bowl to hold your needles in. You can also get these for really cheap at tool stores. Okay. So I didn't film a transition for this part. We are now going to take the pattern out of the bag and cut all the pieces we need out. When you buy a pattern with multiple garments on it, it's gonna have more pieces than what you need. So only cut out what you need. Let's cut the pattern out. Okay, so I have all of the pattern cut out and I'm warming up my iron. Hot. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna cut the lining, interfacing, and fabric. When you're doing this, one of the best ways is to use pattern weights. I normally just use pins though, because I am a gremlin. I will show y'all all the cutout pieces in a second. All right, so I have everything pinned on the fabric, and then we can see right here, those already have the lining on it. I do want to point out something. So this is the right way up, and we can see that the text is readable. This one is the wrong way up, and we can see all the text is backwards and it's fainter. This is per the instructions. So see how this is white and then this is dark? This means that this goes wrong side up and this goes right side up. And that makes the pattern match later. So now I have my beautiful dress. We have lining, we have interfacing, and then we have our actual dress fabric here. Wow! So our next step is to read the directions Oh, Possum didn't like my sass. Okay, we'll get started. Hello. We're now at the point where we're actually going to start sewing, so we're going to talk about how to use a sewing machine. First, this is just a dust cover that I made. This is a Singer sewing machine. It's pretty common. This would say is like a mid-level. It's not super advanced, but it's not like the cheapest machine you can get. Almost all modern sewing machines work pretty much the same way. So I'll teach you what all these knobs are, what this is, and what this pile of cords is. So the first thing that you see when you open it is it has these two pieces. This is your pedal. So you plug one side into the machine and one side into an outlet. When you plug it in and press it, it will make the needle actually go, and then that's how you actually sew. While we are playing with everything, it is really important to keep it off, because otherwise, if like you're just kind of, you press on this while your hand's under here, you could hurt yourself with the needle. The next part of the sewing machine is the actual machine. It has all these knobs on it. This knob over here controls the needle, so you can use this to set the needle into whatever you're sewing or to pull it back out when you're done. The next knob here is your length knob, and that is how long it will go in between each stitch. The longer the length, the looser the stitch. So I have it all the way on 4, which is the max length. And then we have this weird symbol here. What this means is this is for sewing buttonholes. Not all machines will have this, but that's what these little double lines on the length mean. Here we have the width, and what the width is the distance this way for the stitch, which for like a straight stitch, which is what this is showing us right here, it doesn't super matter. But if we were doing something like a zigzag stitch, this will decide how far apart each zigzag will go. And then we can see here we have that button symbol again, and that shows us how to make a button hold. And then we have a couple other ones. I'll be honest, I've had this machine for like, I think we're coming up on like 10 years. I use this one, and this one. And that's up here. We have a tension. So let's take a look apart at these boys. So this part comes out, and then we open this, and then it says caution, don't use this while it's on, because this all moves. So you don't want to like have your hand in there and then the metal things catch around your fingers. But mine's unplugged, so it's okay. So in this hole right here, your bobbin will go, and so you will have thread coming from the top and thread coming from the bottom. So what the tension is how tight between these two different threads it will pull. So the lower it is, the looser it is, the higher it is, the more tense it is. And you can see it has some little marks right here. You want to leave it kind of in the middle unless you're doing something specialty. Have other stuff too, and you might not have a stitch picker if you have a very basic machine or a really old one, but you'll have length this and this unless you have an ancient machine. The only other thing on the front that we're going to talk about is this. This will make your whole machine go backwards. So instead of the fabric going through the machine, it will pull it back out. This is nice for like finishing corners and edges and stuff, but you don't use it a lot. If you're gonna sew backwards for a long time, you normally pull the whole garment out and flip it. So that's what all the knobs do. Up here at the top, we have this here, and this is a bobbin winder. So you put the yarn, your string you're going to use here, and then you can wind it like this, and you can wind your bobbin. And the bobbin is the piece that goes in here. These are relatively universal, but they can be different sizes for different machines. So when you go to get more for your machine, make sure it'll actually fit before you buy it. Not all sewing machines have this, but most newer ones do. So this is also what a bobbin is. A bobbin is just a little tiny spool that goes in our machine. This is a bobbin case. It goes over the bobbin like this, which slides in. You take the end of your string and you wind it through. So see, it's not all the way in yet. and it clicked, and now it's in. Bobbin tension can be one of the most fickle things to figure out, and it can really hinder your sewing with the machine. So what you want to do is you're going to wind it through, you have it in all the way like this, and you're going to test it. That's perfect. So I held it by just the string and gave it a little like yo-yo shake, and it moved about 2 to 3 inches. That means that this is at a perfect tension. If it all just came apart, that means that the tension is too loose, and you would use the little specialty screwdriver that came with your machine and tighten this. If I shook it really hard and it didn't move at all, that means that the tension is too tight. That is this piece. And so then what happens is this piece goes in here like this. With newer sewing machines, and probably older ones too, nothing gets forced. It will all kind of do it for you and click into place. So if you are really struggling to get a piece in place or for something to work, make sure you are correctly oriented, because it shouldn't be too difficult. The next piece of the machine we have is our strike plate and our feeder. So the strike plate is just this metal plate right here, and you can see that it has lines on it to help us with our hems. And then this little textured piece is the piece that will grab the fabric and move it through the machine. We have the foot. This is detachable. So this is a very standard foot. It kind of looks like a little sled. Needle goes through, string goes through, great. You have a bunch of different feet for different options. And I'll show you the back in these 2 little knobs that I'm playing with back here. So that's our knobs. That's our bobbin winder where we put our actual. If you'll notice, I did not actually wind this bobbin with the thread that I'm using on top. You don't have to, because this stuff on the bottom you will not see. You should make them something that are the same tension and thickness, because you don't want 2 different materials pulling at 2 different tension. I want to show you a cool piece of the machine that I think a lot of people don't know about. So my string's all tied up because I left it loose. So I'm going to look at the side of my machine, and I have this little notch. It has a razor blade in it, so you can cut all your stuff without getting a pierce. Not all machines have these, but most machines do. Okay, so we take our boy. This is just a stopper, so if you don't have one of these, you could use like a rubber band or something, and it just holds our bigger bobbin in place, or spool, so it doesn't bounce and slide around. It's not a big deal with these tiny ones, but once you're using a bigger spool, it can move a lot more. So it goes through. So the next piece over here is all of this, and it has like a bunch of these weird, like make a U-turn 3. What this is directions to show you how to wind and thread your machine. All machines are a little bit different, but they mostly follow the same thing. So I'm going to take it apart so you guys can see what it looks like on the inside. So we can see when we take the cover off, we get a little light bulb, which helps us. So what happens when we go through here, that tells us to go through this hook, and we go through here. So then 2 tells us to go down, 3 tells us to wind. We're going to get into this part right here, and then we come down into our needle. Needles need to be replaced frequently, and your machine needs to be cleaned every now and then. To clean your machine, all you do is get all the lint off with like a Q-tip, and then you put some oil in it. Every now and then take it to an actual dealer to get it deep cleaned. You don't want to use compressed air because you can push all the dust into the machinery. So once you have threaded your machine, you put it through the needle. Also, I don't actually recommend licking your yarn or thread, because the humidity will make it frizz more over time. So now we have the top of our machine threaded and our bottom threaded. But if we just tried to sew right now, there would be a chance that it wouldn't quite latch correctly. So you take the hand winder, you pull it down, and then notice here it's starting to wrap around the thread here. Boop. And lift the foot. And so now we have both threads on the top. So now we know that when we put our fabric through, both threads are gonna mesh through. we can close this. Put our cover back on. You do not need to take this off when you sew. I just wanted to show you what it does. So that is all the different, oh, nope, not quite yet. Ooh. So back here we have two different levers. This lever down here is to release the foot like we did earlier. And then this one sets the foot down on the fabric. So this was the one that you will engage before you start sewing to hold the fabric down. If you do not engage this and you start sewing, your fabric will just move and do its own thing. So make sure to engage. So that's all the parts of the sewing machine. So to actually sew, once we have everything threaded and cleaned and at the right tension, you want to test it with just some scrap fabric of the same type of what you're doing. So I have the blue lining fabric, or I'm sorry, the blue real fabric that we have. So you get it there, you hop it in. I'm not going to turn the machine on because it's going to be pretty loud. So I'm going to use the hand winder. You push it through. And so this would be the point where you would start using the foot pedal and it would go automatically. It'll be really loud, so I'm just going to pretend with the hand turner. Just use their hand winder to loosen it. Come through. We use our side cut. And there. So we've been able to pull everything out pretty fast. I'm not super worried about it because we're doing it by hand. So then we can maybe make an adjustment from there and be like, oh, I think it needs more tension. Oh, I think it needs less. Oh, I didn't like how the yarn looked, the thread looked. So you can make all your adjustments there. So that's the basics of the sewing machine. You do also have this for just next to it. Boop. And so now I'm gonna sew everybody together and I'll see y'all in a bit. Okay, so this is what we have so far is we have the beginning of the bodice. You can see I didn't iron the fabric yet. All I've done is iron the darts. So far I have some darts and then we have the side seam and that's it. So that's where we are so far. So the next step is to basically copy this with the lining material and then we keep on keeping on. And as of right now, we can see that, like, you know, the edges are unfinished. It's all scriggly. This is what we got so far. And now we have a liner. So I've spent the last half hour trying to sew a top lining for the garment. Because I put the sleeves on different than what the instructions said, it won't fit. Ah! So I've taken the bodice apart. You can see the lining in there. And I've pinned the skirt to it. We're gonna sew it and then we're pretty close to having a garment. So we have put the zipper in. So now what we are going to do is take a break to stretch. If you are doing anything with a lot of fine wrist and finger motions, you want to take breaks to stretch, otherwise you can get like carpal tunnel and stuff. So stretch, take a break. Okay, so we have now sewn our dress. Now it's time for the big reveal. So review of the dress. It's a dress. I don't hate it. Technical issues. I think the fabric didn't really behave as I was expecting it to. I was expecting a lot more air quality, I guess. I also had a lot of issues with the sizing for the pattern. I had to go all the way up to a size 12 for the sleeves, and I'm typically a size 8 in dresses, so I'm not really sure what's up with that. The rest of the dress I did cut in a 10, and it was tight on my shoulders, butt, and hips, but it was really loose in the bust area. I tried to fix that by adding extra darting, and it helped, but it didn't really solve the issue that it wasn't built for my body type, which isn't anybody's fault. I have pretty broad shoulders and a small bust, so it's kind of hard to find stuff that fits me anyways. That's mostly the only issues I had though, was the pattern was kind of a weird fit and the fabric didn't really behave how I wanted. I am pretty happy with the hemming job. The zipper went in really easy, which is typically pretty hard. I didn't like how much the back crunched up, and I'm not really sure what would have fixed that, because like it did again feel really loose in the front, so I don't really know. Maybe tightening the whole piece? I'm not sure. But yeah, that is all we got for this week. As usual, for all the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I post. I think that's it. I will see y'all next week.